everybody, and welcome to our Friday coffee chat with this little hot
Cheers.
cup. I'm Henrike with a hot coffee, with a hot coffee sitting on Tenerife today in the sun, and I'm looking forward to talking to my friend
Margrét, sitting in Washington, D.C., where it's just getting bright outside.
Cheers.
Cheers.
For today, I had an idea because we've been asked that so much, and it's a topic that is so big, and it's the EU directive about pay transparency, and so many questions about that. So I just was thinking that look at me as if I'm not Henrike, I'm just some company, any company, and I have this weird look in my face thinking, hey, come on, what is this EU directive about? Could you just tell me in a couple of simple words so that I understand what's that? What's coming?
Sure. When I organize my thoughts around the directive, I put them in 3 buckets. So the directive in my mind is really a collection of tools aimed at reaching pay equity. So how do we then kind of get our thoughts organized? So I put it into 3 buckets. So one bucket is focused on, your pay structures and processes. So your pay structure needs to be fair. Your recruitment processes need to be fair. Prior salary history ban, and then salary disclosure. So you no longer can ban employees from disclosing their salaries. So those kind of are my processes bucket. Then we have a pay transparency bucket, and under the pay transparency bucket, basically there are requirements about information to job seekers. So information requirement prior to employment. Then there is requirements for your current employees. So they have right to certain information. And then there's external reporting. So I put kind of all of those things under the pay transparency umbrella. And then because in the reporting requirements, one of the things that you're supposed to do is to report pay gaps by group. The third bucket is the pay gap calculations. So that's how I organize my thoughts about the directive.
I think that helps, but I'm still looking at these 3 buckets, and I would like to know a bit, if you could just take like a dive into bucket number 1 and tell me a bit more about the pay structures and processes. What's that about? What does it really mean?
Sure. So one thing to note is that there's still some regulatory uncertainty around the directive, because we have the directive, but then, each member state needs to put forward their own regulations that will detail some of this in more detail, and there will be more guidance. But the directive requires you, for your pay structure, should enable, I'm actually quoting from my notes, enable the assessment of whether workers are in a comparable situation, and the value of work needs to be on the basis of objective gender neutral criteria. So really, what do we need? So we need to somehow enable and make sure that there are not hidden biases in our pay structure. And this connects directly with the pay transparency bucket, because there you have to communicate to your employees why they're getting paid what they get paid, and what are their opportunities for progression, for example. So basically, if you are just getting started, you should start by reviewing your pay structure, right? So is it fair and gender neutral? Does it align with your business strategy? But then it needs also to be transparent and explainable, because your team will be tasked with, explaining and having conversations about the pay structure and pay in general. So that's one thing where I would start, and then so that's under that process umbrella. So then the other items, as I read the directive, are simpler, right? So there is, you cannot ask job applicants about the salary history. So that's the prior salary history ban, right?
Yeah.
So And nowadays, that is starting to become the norm anyways, but, maybe, make sure that your recruitment processes are updated and your recruitment partners are aware so that, things go smoothly. In terms of the recruitment process, the directive actually states that job titles and job vacancies, when you advertise them, they need to be gender neutral. And then there's a requirement that the recruitment process are non-discriminatory. However, there are no details in the directive of how exactly we should make sure that our recruitment processes are, non-discriminatory. But what you can, start doing right away is to ensure that job titles are gender neutral. You can revisit the processes behind creating job job postings to ensure that they are gender neutral. And then just make sure that the last kind of item in this bucket, the salary disclosure. So the directive bans the ban on salary disclosure, right? So then one thing that is uncertain, right? So there are a number of uncertainties around the directive. One of the things that are uncertain is whether this will be or apply also to current contracts or just moving forward. But at least it's I would think about making sure that moving forward that ban on salary disclosure is not part of the employee contracts.
I could imagine that we're not going to be changing old contracts now. Looking at some company sizes, I would think this is really a bit of a challenge. And also the question of, if you look at the EU having now each country doing their little transporting the directive into their legislation, and there might be differences there. But I do hope that they, and I have heard that some talk to make sure that the differences are not too big, because I mean many companies are not only in one country, and then they should at least be very, 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 very similar legislations in the countries. But the last bucket, if I remember correctly from your 3 buckets, and I'm thinking in a pond system at the moment, is the actual work on the analysis. So what is that about? How do they do that? What do you have to look for? I think the question also of when you say structures, it's not only the equal work, it's the equal work of equal value, and then you analyze. And how do you get to your gaps to find them?
Yeah, so basically the pay equity analysis that is required by the directive relates directly to the external reporting. So which I put under the pay transparency bucket. So one of the items that you need to report to authorities is the gender gap between workers by category of workers. So that's where the pay equity analysis comes from. So it's these pay gaps between in groups of categories of workers. And one of the uncertainties that we all face at the moment is that there's no clear guidelines on how categories of workers will be implemented, right? But in terms of the pay equity analysis, you need to study your unadjusted, meaning just the gender pay gaps in these categories. If you find that there's a category where comparable workers, right? So there shouldn't be any gaps, but if we find a category of workers where the unadjusted gap is more than 5%, you can run an analysis that can explain that. So maybe you have a category of workers, but where one gender has way more experience, and that's something that is part of your pay philosophy to pay for. Then we can run our regression analysis in that group and see if that pay gap comes below 5%. If it doesn't, you need to reduce it below 5%. And then we can have a long philosophy conversation about whether 5% is the right number, which I think is way too high, but it is what it is. But that's where the pay equity analysis comes in. So if you have unexplained gaps of more than 5%, you have a little bit of time to correct it. But if you do not, then it goes into a process that is laid out in the directive of what happens then. But you have the opportunity to first explain it by gender neutral factors. That's our standard regression analysis, and then fix it if the gap is larger than that.
Wow, that's cool. Now I have this pond system in my head, and I would like to carry on talking about it, but I think we need to, our time's out, so we will discuss if 5% is good or not in another coffee chat. And I thank you very much. Every time I hear EU directive now, I will think of my pond system, which is interconnected and where my little employees can sort of swim through like the fish and go from transparency to structures analysis and make sure that everybody is paid equal for work of equal value, not only of equal work. So thank you a lot, Margrét. Oh God, I need another coffee after this session now. See you
Have
next
a great
time.
day.
Great day.
Bye.
Bye-bye.